Hello and welcome back to the course. My name is Ned. I am a technical evangelist at Caspio, and in this video, I will be teaching you how to create all the forms and reports needed for this service request application. I definitely don't recommend that you watch this video until you have first seen the prior three videos, where I teach you how to properly set up the foundation of this app. That includes table structure, relationships, views, and authentications. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and begin. To build all the forms and reports, what we need to do next is go to the Data Pages object. Data pages are the applications that you will be embedding into your own website. So for example, if you were to build a web form, a report, a chart, eventually what you're going to want to do is embed that into your own website. Before we build a data page, let's spend a minute talking about folders. Folders are not going to affect the way your application functions in any way. Their main use is to help you stay organized inside your account. And the way I want you to use folders is, depending on how many user groups you have, you really should create a folder for each user group. In our example, we have customers, service reps, and approving managers. So what we want to do is create a folder for each of those groups. So the first folder I'll create is for customers. Let's go with service reps. And finally, approving managers. Now the workflow of the application begins with the customer submitting a request. So let's go ahead and build some data pages for the customer. I'm going to open up my folder and click on the link at the top to launch Caspio's point-and-click data page wizard. These are all the different types of data pages that you can create. So if you need to build an input form, you're going to select input form. If you want to build reports to output the data, you can build a report. You can build calendars if you need to track appointments or events. Charts if you're looking to build dashboards, maybe analytics, metrics. And finally, we have HTML data pages. In today's application, I will show you an example how we can use an HTML data page to redirect a user when they're logging into the application from one web page to another web page. Now, there's a reason why I'm doing this, and I'm going to show you that in a live example in a few minutes. But for now, let's go ahead and build our very first HTML data page. On this screen, I'll give my data page a name. I'm going to call this customer login screen. Here you can apply a different style. This is for the aesthetics, the look and feel of your form. I'm going to go ahead and stick with this default style that I have inside my account. And I'm going to choose to have English localization, even though you have the ability to change the language to something else. Or you can also go to styles and localizations to fully modify your own style to match the look and feel of your brand, and localization if you need to have specific regional settings. For access and security, I'm going to enable this checkbox, and I will select my customer login that we created under this object here to the left. Because I want this redirect to work only when the customer logs in, this is the reason why I'm selecting this authentication on top of this data page. I'm going to hit next. Now what I like to do, since I know HTML and I'm somewhat familiar with JavaScript, I like to disable the HTML editor and just input my own code inside the screen. And this is a very simple line of code. It's one line of code that you can type out very quickly. Script window.location equals, and then in between the quotes is where you're going to put your destination URL. In other words, when the person logs in, to what URL or to what web page do you want them to redirect it to? And in my example, I have a website created, submit request.html. I'm going to close my quotes, and then I'm very simply going to put semicolon after that and close my script. So what the script is basically doing is when the customer logs in, it's going to take them to this URL of my website. Let me show you a live example just for reference. Here's my customer login screen. Notice that my customer login screen is on this web page, login.html. But the moment the customer logs in, take a look at the behavior. It's redirecting me to submit_request.html. The reason why I like to create this redirect is so that I can hide the customer navigation menu from the login screen. Let me log out one more time. Notice how on this web page, login.html, I'm seeing this navigation menu. But only until I've logged in do I get to see the navigation menu that pertains to the customer. So let's try that one more time. I'm going to log in as Ken, and you will see how this URL has a different navigation menu. Of course, I can add additional navigation menu items here if I wanted to, but I only chose to have one. Now let's go back to Caspio, and very simply, when you're done, click on Finish. You don't have to create this HTML data page if you don't want to, if the script is too much for you. You can actually apply the authentication directly to the submission form, which I'll show you in just a moment. But the script is actually very handy when it comes to redirect, just to make sure that the user is seeing different things before they log into the application. For my second data page that I want to create is the submission form for a customer to submit the request. So looking at my live example, I would like to build this form next. So let's build our new data page. And this time I'll build a submission form because I want the customer to submit the request. I'll hit next. And I'm going to select my table that contains all the service requests because as a customer, when I submit the request, I want that information to be stored in that table. Let's give it a name. Create new service request. Once again, you can apply a different style and localization. And again, I can restrict access to my customers because I want the customers to log in to be able to submit that request. Now, what fields do we want to have on the submission form? As a customer, we should only be able to see fields that we're going to be filling out. And in this example, we need customer ID, service type, comments, and service status. These fields are going to be for our reps and approving managers. Therefore, the customer doesn't need to see them on the form. Let's hit next. And now I need to make a few modifications. My customer ID field, what I'm going to do with this one is simply just hide that field on the submission form, and I'd like to use the authentication field to look back as far as the customer table to grab their primary key and stamp that key inside the service request table. So by doing that, essentially what you're doing is on the submission form, you're hiding that customer ID field, but it's automatically populating the ID of the customer that's logged into the application. And we can grab that value using the authentication method inside the data page wizard. For service type, we had three options. I'm very simply going to create a drop down here, and I will put new install, troubleshooting, and we had cancellation. For my comments, I'd like to expand this to be a text area. And finally, we have service status. And service status is also going to be a hidden field because upon submission, we want to be able to flag this request as new by default. So what we do is very simply just hide this field and assign a default value of new. If you would like to see what the form looks like at this point, you can always click on preview. And there's my login screen that we applied to this data page. What I can do now is log in as John, and there's my submission form. So before you even save your changes by clicking on finish, you can always preview the form to see what it looks like. And what I'd like to do is add maybe another HTML block by using this insert button. I'll add that above my customer ID field, and I'm very simply going to just put a heading here. And I'm going to change the format. I can highlight the text and very simply maybe change that to heading 2 to make it a little bit bigger. Let's preview once more. And you can see how we added a heading above our form. Now, if you're happy with the look, you can always close that preview screen, hit next, and then you're going to be able to customize your confirmation message upon submission. You can also enable emails to go out if you'd like. We're not going to do that in today's example. Let's just keep it the way it is. And when done, we're going to click finish. So within just a couple of minutes, I was able to create my login screen that redirects the customer to a different URL and the submission form to allow the customer to submit that service request. In part 5 of this course, I will teach you how to deploy both of these data pages onto a website. But for right now, in part 4, let's continue building the rest of our data pages. Now let's go ahead and build some data pages for the service reps. And according to our workflow, if you recall, when the customer submits a request, and we log in as the service reps, we should be able to pick those new requests that are coming in. So let's take a look at a live example quickly. I will log out as the customer and I will log in as the service rep. So let's log in as Tyler, and as soon as I log in, we should be able to see a report that allows us to pick these requests and assign those requests to ourselves. So along with the redirect for the service reps, we're going to build that data page first, and then we're going to build this report that allows the service rep to pick the request. So let's go into our account. Let's close the customer folder, and let's open up the services rep folder. The first data page that I would like to build, similar to how we did with the customer side, we want to build that redirect to allow the employee or the service rep to log in and see a different navigation menu. So I'm going to build a data page for the employees. And I'm going to build an HTML data page, click Next. And I'm going to call this data page Employee Service Rep Login Screen. I'm going to use the same style, same localization, and this time I'm going to apply my login screen for the service reps. Hit Next. Disable the HTML editor like before, and very quickly just add that script. Window.location =, your destination URL. Now for my service reps, my destination URL is going to be new requests.html, semicolon, and then just close the script. I'm trying to redirect my service reps to this URL, so when they log in, they're going to be able to pick those new requests. Once you're done, click on Finish. And there's the data page that allows the service reps to be redirected upon login. Now let's build a report that allows the service rep to be able to assign those requests to themselves. New data page. And since I'm trying to output the data via the web, I no longer need to build a submission form because submission form is going to input the data into a database. A report is allowing me to output the data. So I'm going to go into tabular format, and if you look at the illustration below, this is essentially what we're going to be building. We can have the ability to search data, view the results, and the ability to drill into details. So I'm going to hit Next, and I'm going to select my service request info table as my data source because this table contains all of the service requests. Let's give this a name. Again, same style, same localization, and very important here is to restrict access just to our service reps. And let's hit Next. Now I could have the ability to search via the web, but I'm not going to do that because I just want to be able to see the list of all the requests that are coming in. So I'm going to filter my report based on predefined criteria. I'm going to allow parameters and bridge in external parameters. Let's hit Next. And now, how are we filtering these requests? Well, we said that we only want to be able to see the requests that are flagged as new. So therefore, I need to make sure I include my service status as the filtering field. And on the following screen, I'm going to assign the value for service request to new. Again, we want this report to filter all the requests that are stamped as new. Now, what information do I want to display on the results page? So on the results page, I would like to display the customer ID, service type, comments, and maybe dates submitted. Of course, you can include any other fields if you have additional ones in your table, but for our example today, we're going to stick with these 4 fields on the results page. I would like to enable the bulk edit functionality because the bulk edit, if we look at the live example, it's going to allow me to select my request and then click on the bulk edit link and very simply change the status of that request to something else. So that's the reason why I'm enabling bulk edit inside the data page wizard. Hit Next. And these are my results. Just like on the submission form, I would actually like to add a heading above my results page. So I'm going to insert what we call header and footer. And inside the header of my data page, I'm going to say, you know what, we can actually go to the live example. Since I already have the text, I can just grab this text, copy it, go back to my account, and very simply just change the text to heading 2 to make it a little bit bigger. I don't need to make any additional changes to my results page. Let's move on. And here's my bulk edit screen. On the bulk edit screen, the only thing that I'm interested in seeing is the ability to change the status from new to pending and also be able to stamp the service rep ID in the service request table so that we can assign that request to that specific service rep. So what I'll do really quickly here is delete the date submitted field, take out the service comments, take out the service type. Before I can take out the customer ID, I do need to add additional fields because we can't have an empty screen here. So I'm going to use the insert button, grab the data source field, and then I'm going to include the two fields that I need. One is service status, and the other one is service rep ID. Click apply, and now I can remove my customer ID. For service status, we know that we're going to change the status from new to pending review. So I'm going to change this to a drop-down and very quickly just add pending review because that's one of my statuses. And for the service rep ID, I'm going to make this field hidden. And just like when we stamp the customer ID in the service rep table, we're going to do the same thing here. Authentication field and grab the employee ID from the employees table. Now, because this field is hidden, when we hit update on that bulk edit screen, it's automatically going to stamp the employee's ID into the service request table. And this is allowing us to associate the service rep to that specific request. Let's hit next. Let's go ahead and sort our data based on date submitted field. And let's go ahead and have it be Z to A so that we can see the most recent requests come in first. Hit next. And in this example, we don't really actually have a need for a details page, so we can quickly disable the details page. And at this point, we can click on Finish to save our changes, or if you would like, you can click on Preview to see what the report looks like. Now watch when I hit Preview now. We need to first log in as the service rep. And in our example, the service rep is Ken at rep.com and password was test. And notice that I'm not seeing any records inside this report. Why? Because we don't have any data inside the service request table. Let's close the preview screen. When you're done making all of your changes, we're going to hit finish. And there's the second data page now for the service reps to be able to pick those new requests. I do want to quickly show you a very simple workflow that we have created so far because I want you to see when the data starts to get inputted into the table, how these data pages are going to display that information. So for example, if I log in as the customer using the preview mode, and if I click on preview on the submission form, and you can try this yourself if you want. So let's do a new install, service comments NA. Remember, we have a hidden field on this form that's flagging this request as new. Upon submission, your submission was successful. Let's close the preview screen. Now this report should be able to display that data because we have one item inside that table. It's been flagged as new. So when I hit preview, you'll be able to see that request. Not only do you see this request on the data page, but if you go inside your table that's populating all of the service requests and you open that table, you should be able to see that data populating inside the database. And there's that request. Let's go back out to data pages and let's continue building the remaining data pages for our service reps. But very quickly, I just wanted to show you that if you get no records found, that more than likely means that you don't have any data in your table. So just play around with the preview screen and start populating some information in the database, and then you can have dummy data to test with as you're building your application. Now what I would like to build is the ability for the service reps to be able to manage their own requests. So we're able to see the new requests, and now we have the capability of changing the status to pending, but at the same time, stamp the service rep ID to the service request table so that request belongs to that service rep. Let me show you a live example. Here are all the new requests. Now, if I want to assign this request to myself, I'm going to click on Edit, change the status to pending, but remember, we have a hidden field here that's also stamping the ID of the employee into the service request table. And upon update, Not only are we changing the status, but we're also stamping the ID of that employee into the service request table. And the report that I want to build is this one here, to manage request. This report is filtering all the requests that are flagged as either pending review or resubmit for approval. And there's that request, and then I can go to details and I can make modifications to that request. I can add internal notes, appointment notes, I can set the schedule date, and be able to change the status from pending to submit for approval. So let's go back to Caspio and let's build that data page. Now, what's neat about Caspio is that I could actually click on new data page to build a new data page from scratch, or I can quickly just make a copy of this data page by clicking on more and clicking on duplicate. All I need to do here is just rename this data page to something else. Let's call it manage assigned service requests. And when you hit save, all you've done so far is just made the same exact copy of the data page. It's not going to have the same functionality. I want to be able to make edits to this data page, and I'm going to do that by clicking on edit. And there are a couple of changes that I need to make here. We're still going to use the tabular format report. Let's hit next. On this screen, we're going to maintain the service rep login. And now what I need to do is enable what's called record level security, or RLS for short. I need to enable this on this report because I want to be able to show the reps just the requests that are assigned to their specific ID. And that's what record level security allows us to do. The very first field is the field in the authentication. So as you log in as the rep, it's going to verify your ID from the employee info table. The matching field in the current data source is going to be the service rep ID, because now we're stamping the ID of the employee inside the service request table as well. So we need to match that ID in order for us to display that request that belongs to that unique ID. Once again, we're going to use service status as the filtering field. And this time, I'm not interested in seeing the requests that are flagged as new. I want to be able to see all the requests that have a status of pending review or resubmit for approval. So what we're going to do is insert what we call new criteria. You're going to see two options underneath your field. Make sure your logical operator is set to OR. And criteria 1, we're going to say resubmit for approval. And we're going to say pending review. You can actually go to the logic tab to see how that's set up. So criteria 1 is equal to resubmit for approval or pending review. Make sure that you have your spelling correctly, because you don't want to be off by a letter, then it's not going to display you any data in the results page. Let's move on. In my results page, I'm going to include an additional field. I'm going to move over the service status field to my right. I'm going to hit next. Now in this report, I don't really have a need for bulk edits. So let's go ahead and disable that. Click next. And now in my results page, what I would like to do is be able to group all the requests that are pending review and all the requests that have been resubmitted for approval. So I'll move the service status field to the top and very simply just enable data grouping with a standard result set. You can play around with it as much as you want to get to your desired look and feel. One more thing that I wanted to show you that you can enable on the results page is we have the ability here to insert a calculated field. Now I will go ahead and position that towards the bottom. And inside this content here, inside this window, you can actually put expressions. You can also add functions, SQL statements if you wanted to aggregate data and also get totals from the table. So it is a little bit more complex to use, but I'm going to show you a very simple example of how we can calculate the age or the number of days since that request was submitted. So I'm just going to give this a label, request age, and inside this window, I'm going to insert a function, and it'll be a date function because we want to calculate the date. So we want to get the date difference. And inside the parentheses, we want to calculate the number of days. So we're going to go DD, comma, and then we're going to insert the date submitted field. After the date submitted field, add another comma, and then insert one more function. to get the UTC date. And that's all you have to do. If you set this up correctly, now this calculated field will actually calculate the difference between the date submitted date and the number of days that have passed since the submission. Let's move on. Let's go ahead and leave this the way it is. We're going to sort the data based on the date submitted field. Let's enable the details page for this report. And you can actually have a default details link, or you can specify a field in your results page to become the details link. So in this case, I'm going to have the customer ID become the details link. So when I click on the ID, or in this case, the name of the customer, it's going to take me to the details page. And on the details page, I'm going to include all the fields except for service rep ID, approving manager ID, service request ID, and the last updated field. These are the fields that I'm interested in seeing in the details view. We're going to hit next. And now it's time to customize the details view. And this is actually very easy to do. The first thing I'm going to do is insert a header and footer. And in the header, which is above my details view, I just want to add a simple heading. Let's call it request details. And again, we're going to highlight that and change the format to heading 2, just so we can have a nice heading in the details view. Let's add an HTML block above the service status. So I'm going to insert an HTML block, and very simply, just like before, we can put internal notes, highlight the text, and change to heading 2. Here's my service status field. Now, as the service rep, if you recall from our lookup table, service reps in the dropdown should only be able to see the statuses that belong to their role. In this case, a role called rep should only be able to see pending review and resubmit for approval. So the way you're going to set this up is to create a dropdown, and instead of the source being custom values, you're going to do a lookup table, and you're going to select that table that contains all the statuses. And what we want to display is the request status, the actual status, not the status ID. Now, if you leave it this way, this dropdown is going to display all the statuses. But remember, we only want to filter out the status that belongs to that role. And for that, we're going to use the security tab. We're going to enable this checkbox. And the field in the authentication is going to be the role field. And the matching field in the lookup data source, what exactly is the lookup data source? Well, it's this lookup table that we selected in this tab. And that table also contains the role field. Now, when I'm logged in as a specific role, in this case, rep, I'm only going to be able to see the status that belongs to that role, rep, from the lookup table. This is how you filter out and limit what information is displayed from that lookup table. For the internal notes, let's have this be a text area. Appointment notes, same thing. Appointment schedule date, that's going to be a text field. And manager comments, we're going to leave this as display only. When you're done, you can click on finish, or you can click on preview. Notice once again we have no records found. Why? Because at the moment, inside a table, there are no requests that are flagged as pending review or resubmit for approval. But we can quickly change that because we already have one entry that's flagged as new. So let's test it out. Let's close the preview. Let's save our changes. And if we look at this report that's showing that new request, let's hit preview. There's that request that we looked at just a few minutes ago. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and select that request, click on the edit link, and assign that request to myself simply by changing the status to pending review. Remember, please don't forget, we're also stamping the ID of the employee as we click on the update button on this bulk edit screen. So when I change the status and click on update, obviously this report is no longer going to show that request because now we changed the status. Let's close the preview screen. Now this report, when I hit preview, should show me that request because the status was changed to pending review. And this report is filtering out all the requests that are either pending for review or resubmit for approval. Now, one thing is, you may have noticed from this report, I forgot to change my heading because it still says pick new service request. So what I'm going to do is go back to my account, very simply just edit my report, navigate to the results page, And in the header, I will just change that heading to something else. Manage service requests. Click Finish. Preview once again. And now we see that different heading above this report. If you're happy with the results, you can close the preview screen. And now let's go ahead and build our final data page for the service reps to be able to see all the requests that have been approved or declined. So let's build that final data page for the service reps. And this data page, again, as I mentioned, we want to be able to display all the ones that have been approved or declined by the approving manager. So let's take a look at the live example. Let's go back to this report here for approved declined requests. And all this report is, it's very similar to the one that we just created. The only difference is that we want to filter out the requests that are either approved or declined. So let's go ahead and build that one really quickly. And as I mentioned before, you don't really have to build a data page from scratch. If you want to practice all the steps, what I'm going to do is very simply just make a copy of this one by creating a duplicate, and I'm going to call it approved declined requests. I'm going to save my changes. And now I need to edit my data page. Same way as before, we're just going to apply a few changes to it. Hit next. We'll use the service rep login, that's correct. And now we don't need record level security. It's up to you. You can enable it here if you want to. If you only want to show the service reps their own approved and declined requests. But in our example, we chose to display all the requests that have been approved and declined to all of the service reps. Because as a service rep, if I want to be able to see other requests that have been approved and declined that belong to somebody else, I may be interested in seeing. Once again, we're going to use the service status to filter the data. And this time, we're not interested in seeing resubmit for approval or pending review. The requests that we want to be able to see here are request approved, and it's also flagged as request declined. These are the ones that we want to be able to see in this report. So let's move on. In my results page, I'm going to include two more fields. I'd like to be able to see the service rep name and last updated. Hit next. I'm not going to enable any editing on the results page. Let's move on. This is my results page. I'm still going to maintain my grouping. Everything else is okay. Let's continue. Except before I forget, let's come over here to the header and change the heading. Approved declined requests. I think this is okay here. We can move on. We can also enable a details page here. Let's continue. And this time I wouldn't mind including the service rep ID, approving manager, and last updated. I don't need to include a service request ID. You can if you want to. So let's just continue. And these are my details page fields. Now you can configure this further if you'd like. You can rearrange these fields however you see fit. So let's see if we can make just a couple of changes here. At the top, I would like to include all of the service request information. So I may actually include an HTML block and put a heading up here to read service request info. Again, we're going to change this to heading 2. I already have one HTML block in here, so let's see what that says. We can leave that as internal notes, and for the internal notes, we can have everything that the employee or the service rep included. So let's go ahead and just have rep internal notes, appointment notes, schedule date, and service rep ID. We're also going to have manager notes, so let's add one more HTML block and put a heading here that says manager notes. Again, highlight it and just change the format. And underneath this, we're going to list some fields. So we have service status, we have the manager's comments, who was the manager to approve or decline that request, and also the last updated field. When you're done, you can click preview once again. Same as before, we're not going to be able to see any records here because at the moment we don't have any requests that have been approved or declined. So we're going to close that tab and very simply just click on finish. Now, before I can see some data in this report, we're going to need to build a report that allows the approving manager to approve, decline, or have the request be resubmitted for approval. And that's what we're going to build next. So let's complete the application by building the very last data page that allows the approving manager to now take action on these requests. So let's take a look at a live example. Here's that same report we just looked at where we were looking at requests approved and declined by the service rep. Let's log out and let's log in as the approving manager. And the approving manager now has the ability to see all the requests that are stamped as submit for approval. And this is the type of report that we're going to build next. So let's go inside Caspio. And again, to make our life easier on ourselves, we can just make copies of data pages instead of rebuilding the entire data page from scratch. So I'm just going to click on More, click on Duplicate, and rename this to Manage Requests. However, what I want to do is I want to place this data page inside this folder for the approving managers. So all I need to do is click on More, click on Move, and select that folder. And now you're going to be able to find that exact data page right over here inside this folder. We're not done yet. We just made a duplicate of that data page. I need to make modifications to it. So let's click on Edit. We'll hit Next. And here what's very important is for you to change the authentication to approving manager because we only want the approving managers to be able to look at this report. We'll hit Next. We're going to keep this the way it is. Once again, we're going to filter out the requests based on the service status field. And this time, we're not looking at two criteria, so we're going to remove this and use just one value, which is submitted for approval, which means that all the requests that are flagged or stamped as submitted for approval, these are the ones that are going to be filtered out for the approving manager. So let's move on. In the results page, perhaps we can take out the last updated, and let's continue. No need for any editing on the results page. Let's move on. These are my results page fields. We're going to keep this the way it is. Except for maybe we can actually disable the grouping because we're not really grouping based on multiple statuses here. We're only looking at submitted for approval, so there's really no need to group data on this results page. We're going to keep this the way it is. Let's go ahead and enable the details view. And in the details view, we're going to include all these fields except for service request ID. And finally, let's modify this. So we have all the fields that pertain to the service request. We have all the fields that pertain to the reps. And at the bottom, let's modify these four fields. So we have the service status that's available for the approving manager. Now remember, we're using the lookup table here, and we're going to be listing all the statuses. Under the security tab, we're enabling this checkbox, and based on the role that's logged into the application, we're going to filter out the status from that lookup table. In this case, I'm logged in as a manager, so you should only filter out the statuses that belong to manager. We have manager comments. So for this, we're going to actually turn into a text area. Approving manager ID. What we need to do here is we need to stamp the ID from the employee table so that we know who was the approving manager to actually approve, decline, or have that request be resubmitted for approval. So we need to hide this field. And just like before, we're going to use the authentication field and stamp the employee ID in the service request table. So this is the final step. Before the approving manager hits update, we want to know who was the approving manager to actually approve or decline that request. So that's why it's important for you to actually use the authentication field to stamp the employee ID. And last updated, we can just keep that as display only. When you're done, just go ahead and click on Finish to save your changes. And that is the very last data page. So now before we deploy this entire application to our website, let's go through the workflow really quickly just so that you can see that final step where the approving manager is able to approve or decline the request. So in my service rep folder, if you recall this data page where we manage all the ones that are pending review or resubmitted for approval, I can click Preview. And here is that request that came in from John Doe. Now, when I go to Details, I can change the status of that request. And notice how this dropdown is only showing the status that belongs to rep. So we can either have pending review or submit it for approval. We can add our notes, and we can also set the scheduled date. But notice now when I submit this for approval, let's just have NA, NA, and then we hit update. We no longer see that request here because now we changed the status. Now, the approving manager should be able to see that request. So let's log in as Jane. And what you'll notice now, Jane is able to see that request that's been submitted for approval. I once again forgot to change my header above my report, so let me do that really quickly. I'm going to go back to my data page and click Edit. And I will quickly navigate to configuration of my results page fields, and in the header, I'm just going to call this Manage Requests. Save my changes. Refresh the preview screen. And now I see Manage Requests. Now when I go to details for this request, as Jane, I have the ability now to approve that request, decline that request, or have that request be resubmitted for approval. Now I know that if I select Resubmit for approval, the service rep will be able to find that request under Managed Requests, but I'm just going to go ahead and approve that request. Add some notes here. Once again, NA just to speed things up. Hit Update. I no longer see that request, but now, as the service rep, if I go to Approve Declined Requests, I should be able to find that request. So this is the entire workflow of the application. Hopefully you see how quickly you can build out these data pages and have an entire workflow application built and deployed on your website very quickly. Thanks for watching part 4. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please join me in the final video, part 5, where I teach you how to deploy and embed each one of these data pages into a website. I hope to see you there.